Hey there, Mama. You're listening to the Lift the Shame podcast. I'm your host, Crystal, mama of 5 and your family's intuitive eating dietitian, here to help you cut through the diet culture clutter so you can enjoy freedom with food as a family. I'm on a mission to help you end the generational legacy of diet culture in your home so you can experience motherhood free from food guilt and body shame. Listen in weekly for guidance on how you can ditch diet culture, heal your relationship with food and your body, and confidently raise intuitive eaters. Let's dive in and lift the shame together. Welcome back to the show, Mama. I am hoping that you and your family had an amazing Thanksgiving holiday. And I know it's just a busy time of year. The holiday season is in full swing and there's a lot going on. And I just appreciate you taking the time to tune in and hope that you can find some encouragement in our time here together today. And before the Thanksgiving holiday, we started a little mini series on reparenting ourselves and what that means and why it's important in our journey, not just for our own relationship with food and our body, but also to support us in raising intuitive eaters. And if you didn't get a chance to listen to some of those episodes, definitely go back to episodes 13 and 14, where you can hear me talking more about that. And today, I just want to kind of resume that conversation and get into some of the details about this, because I know some of these concepts can feel kind of arbitrary. Like, what does it actually mean to reparent yourself around food in your body? And I know a lot of these concepts can sound good in theory, but when it comes to application, that might feel a little more out of reach. So I'm hoping today to just give you some practical application. I want to give you 5 practical ways that you can practice reparenting yourself around food and your body to support you on your journey, and also just to help you with this modeling aspect, right? Like, so many of us are wanting to do for our children what we never had modeled for us. And that's so challenging. And I think it's also hard, to figure out in this space of what it means to actually raise an intuitive eater while you're learning to become one. And I just see you on your journey, and I want you to know that wherever you're at, you're doing an amazing job. This is not an easy task. And I'm just so glad you're here. And I think the fact that you're listening and tuning in shows how much you care for your child and how much you want to learn about how to care for yourself and also be able to model behaviors around food and your body that you would be proud of your child emulating too. So let's dive in. One big thing I want to start with is just acknowledgement of the messages that so many of us grew up hearing around food and bodies. And even for those of us who may have grown up in a home where, positive behaviors around food and body may have been modeled, I just want to acknowledge too the greater scheme, the bigger picture of us living and existing in a dieting culture where all of these messages about shrinking our bodies and restraining what we're eating and really minimizing pleasure and satisfaction around food, these are all messages that we're constantly being bombarded with, regardless of what we experienced in our family of origin. Especially though, if you did experience trauma around food and your body growing up in your home and in your family of origin, that's only going to be perpetuated and reinforced by the messages we are hearing in this dieting culture that we're all submerged in and living in. And, you probably learn to diet and dislike your body from a young age. And this is the reality that a lot of us experienced. And these are some of the common messages that a lot of us grew up hearing. Again, we were taught these things, whether explicitly or by watching our caregivers or by hearing certain words or, again, observing behaviors around food and our bodies. And I'm sure, as you can see with your own children, that kids are sponges and they literally absorb and pick up nonverbal and verbal behaviors. And this is very true around food and bodies. And so some of the common messages that you may have learned and internalized were things like you can't trust yourself with food, especially foods that are more desirable or palatable, like sweets, right? I know for me, that was a message that I internalized at a really young age. I remember in our home, sweets were often hidden. And, if we found them, it was like, ooh, I found the secret stash. But I just want you to think about some of those messages that we internalize when we observe these type of behaviors, right? Other messages you may have picked up on or learned about food or your body was that your body is something that needs to be controlled, that it can't be trusted, that you need to be dieting, you need to be measuring your food, you need to be constantly weighing yourself. And for a lot of us, when we grow up with those messages from such a young age, we don't even realize that there's an alternative option. We just think that that's what everybody does, right? That shrinking your body is a morally acceptable behavior and that it's actually a worthy cause and that it's normal to take up as small of a place as possible, right? That you should shrink your body and be as small as possible, in all aspects of your life. And this is something, again, that a lot of us observe from behaviors around us, from the things that we saw our caregivers doing. If you saw your caregiver dieting or you saw your caregiver constantly stepping on the scale or scrutinizing their body, again, I want you to think about what are those messages that you internalized. There's also this, again, moral aspect to food and bodies that a lot of us internalized, where we came to believe that, eating certain foods made you good, or you were good if you denied yourself sweets and ate a lot of fruits and vegetables and whole grains, that those things were what made you good and acceptable. Or same thing with your body or with exercising, right? Like if you're exercising every single day, that you're so disciplined, and that is something that's seen as good and acceptable and morally superior. These are, again, messages that so many of us have internalized and quite frankly are still unlearning, right? A lot of this kind of goes hand in hand with our productivity culture that a lot of us are, again, submerged into, where what you do is what defines your worth. And I think those things go hand in hand with food and bodies, right? Like if you're very disciplined, do you have self-control? Those are things that we often internalize about food and our bodies. Do we have enough willpower, right? And, again, like a lot of us learned these messages and we learned to diet from a very young age. I still remember vividly having a scale in our home and, stepping on the scale. And I must have been, I think, probably 7 or 8 the first time I stepped on a scale, and just remembering this idea of the smaller the number is, the better it is. And it's just so wild to me that as children, we can start to form those ideas. And I know for me, the thought of my kids doing that same thing or believing those same messages is terrifying. And so, it's important, again, for us to examine those messages that we've internalized, because this is the first step towards really starting to reparent ourselves. Like, how can we start to give ourselves the things around food in our bodies that we didn't have, that we weren't modeled, that wasn't modeled to us, that we didn't learn? And it's never too late. I know so many of us, especially if you have struggled with a very tumultuous relationship with food in your body, or if you've been struggling with an eating disorder, you might not even remember a time in your life where you thought differently about food in your body than you currently do. And you may feel like, my brain is programmed to believe certain things about food, and it might be hard to imagine thinking anything different. And I just want to encourage you to know that it's never too late to rewrite the narrative. And this is where this practical application of taking certain steps to help you rewrite this narrative and challenge that internalized shame that you may have around food in your body is really important. I know when I think about the messages and the things that I want my kids to believe about food in their body, it's definitely not things that I grew up learning, right? Like, you may have learned how to dislike your body from a young age, but did you ever learn how to take care of your body? Did you ever learn that you didn't need to count calories or restrain yourself from eating things that you enjoy? Did you ever learn how to eat for satisfaction or how to create a more enjoyable eating experience? These are, again, things that it's never too late for us to start practicing now, no matter what your past or what your history has been. And, another thing that I think a lot of us have internalized, and this will definitely be a topic for another podcast conversation, but this message of health and worth being defined by how our body looks or how much we weigh, that's very intertwined. And, I think a lot of us have just been indoctrinated to believe certain things about health that are not true. And now we find ourselves in this kind of battle or cycle in wanting to raise kids that are healthy, but also not wanting them to get stuck in the same battles that so many of us have grown up with around food in our bodies. And so, how can you start practicing some of these things and rebuilding this foundation of your relationship with food so that you can change the dialogue? And it really starts with learning how to understand your body, how to live in your body, how to be able to recognize and spot diet culture for what it is. These are some of the foundational pieces of work that will start to make you more resilient to diet culture and all those messages that you grew up hearing and that we continue to receive. And, you may have learned how to diet, how to count calories, how to count points, how to eat the littlest amount of food possible, how to lose weight. Those are all things that I think so many of us grew up learning. And just in the same way that you learned those things, you can unlearn them too. Truly, it is never too late. And, I want you to know that a really practical place to start is by thinking and asking yourself, and again, this can be something to journal or something to talk about with a trusted friend or a counselor or your dietitian, but what are the behaviors that you may still be engaging in or the messages that you feel like are still kind of part of that narrative that you are playing in your mind that you don't want your kids to also live in? Or what are the things that you want your kids to grow up believing about food and their bodies? And, that's a really powerful thing because I think when we can identify okay, these are the things that I really want my kids to believe is their truth about food and their bodies, those are likely the things that you also need in terms of reparenting yourself around food and your body as well. So again, I promised that I would give you some practical strategies because I know, again, a lot of these things can feel good in theory, but when it comes to how do I actually start doing these things in my daily life, I want you to feel like you have some steps and some takeaways. So today I want to give you 5 strategies for reparenting yourself around food and your body. I also want to acknowledge that there are not blanket solutions or one size fits all approaches to reparenting yourself around food in your body. And that really this is a process and this is a journey. And it's okay to not put a timeline on it. I know for so many of us, having kids creates a sense of urgency, especially in healing our relationship with food and our body. It's like, I need to have all this stuff figured out before, my kids get a certain age, or maybe you don't have kids yet and you're like, okay, before I start my family or growing my family, I want to make sure that I have all this figured out. And I just want you to consider the amount of time that you have spent indoctrinated to believe these things about food in your body. Or, again, like when I think about that young age, that young girl at 7 or 8 years old who started weighing herself and started scrutinizing what I was eating because those were the behaviors I saw modeled around me. That is decades of time spending believing those things. And so I just want to encourage you to give yourself some grace and compassion for this journey and recognize that it truly is a journey. It is a work in progress, and this is not something that you have to have all figured out. And I don't want you to feel like I have to put a timeline on this. I just want to invite you to give yourself some compassion on this journey and to go gently with yourself as you examine these parts of your life, because the unlearning is truly a process. And also, I just want to acknowledge too that I do want to give you some practical strategies and application. And I think also there comes a point in time where some of us have to just acknowledge if we need more help and support beyond what we're currently doing. I think in this self-help day and age that we're living in, there's ideas that I can do this, I can figure it all out, I can kind of, right my own ship. And yes, I do want to acknowledge there is so much strength within us and so much that we can do on our own. And it is also great to have extra support when you need it. So if you find yourself listening to some of these things and there are certain concepts or ideas or questions that are just touching, a soft spot in you or maybe even might be triggering to you, I just want to encourage you to examine that. And if it's possible to enlist the help of more support, if you recognize, hey, I think I do need some more help to unpack these layers of messages that I grew up believing, this narrative that I can't seem to challenge or change. There is nothing wrong with getting more help and support with this. And, again, I want to just put in a little plug here for our free support group and virtual community, Lift the Shame. We have an amazing group of moms who are healing their relationship with food and their bodies to raise intuitive eaters and to really break these generational cycles of diet culture and food guilt and body shame. So if you're looking for a place for more support, I definitely want to encourage you to come join us there. All right, so without further ado, how can you start to practically reparent yourself around food in your body? What does that look like? So tip number 1, go on a detox. And what I mean by that, before your brain jumps to something else, is a media detox. Okay. So we live in a media age. We have our smartphones. We are inundated with messages that we're constantly seeing on social media, but just in media in general, not just social media. And, I want to just encourage you to examine what you are consuming on a regular basis. This is really important for learning how to spot diet culture. Also, though, to examine the input that you're regularly receiving, okay? These are regular interactions that we're having, whether it's certain people that we're following on social media or books that we're reading or shows that we're watching. What regular interactions are you having that may be reinforcing some of these core negative beliefs that you're working towards healing? And, one thing I want you to consider is this idea of micro trauma. So for those of us who have had trauma around food and our bodies, when we are hearing these messages that are, throwing shame at food or certain foods that we might like or try to enjoy eating, or that put down bodies in a negative light or in a negative way, that can be a form of micro trauma, which is it might seem insignificant, but it's emotionally injurious, right? It's hurting yourself on a daily basis. And it can seem so minor that you might ignore it or deny it or kind of try to sweep it under the rug per se. But is that subconsciously hurting you and wearing on you and making it harder for you to unlearn some of these messages around food and body? So take the time, to really just examine, again, what are the regular, messages that you're inputting into your brain? And are those aligning with your values? And especially when you think about, okay, these are the things I want my kids to be able to believe around food and their body. Do those accounts or do those things that you're watching or seeing or listening to align with that? And the goal is not to live in a bubble, that's not realistic for us or our kids. But the idea is just to create more safety around food and your body so that you can build more resilience to those messages, especially if you're in this state of healing, right? If you're healing, if you're unlearning, if you're really trying to create more safety in your own body, it's really important to examine the input that you're getting. Because let me tell you, diet culture shows up in the sneakiest of ways and in very subtle ways. And we see right now a lot of masking of diet culture that's hiding under the disguise of wellness culture, right? And so it's really important to just examine the messages that you are regularly inputting and asking yourself, are these creating more harm than good? Is this a form of micro trauma in my daily life? Can I unfollow it? And if you're not sure, think about this idea of maybe just muting some of those accounts that might be making you feel worse about food in your body just temporarily, to give yourself some space to examine, what do I want? What kind of messages do I regularly want to have in my daily life? So that's tip number 1. Tip number 2 here is ditching the scale. I know this can be a tough one because, again, so many of us grew up seeing it in our home and just accepting it as a normal, everyday part of living. Like, that's what we do. We have a scale in our house. We have a scale in our bathroom. Every time before I go into the shower, I pop on the scale, I weigh myself, and it may just be a form of control, right? I also just want you to consider, if this is something that you're currently doing, how this is affecting your relationship with food and your body, and also what are the potential messages that you are sending to your children. Again, this can be a subtle form of diet culture that a lot of us have come to accept because we just grew up learning or seeing those things modeled. And this is a really powerful way to reparent yourself and to support yourself in raising intuitive eaters who don't feel like they need to weigh themselves or regularly be monitoring their body weight, right? Like, when you're not weighing yourself, it's sending a really powerful message to yourself, to your brain, that I am learning how to trust my body. And for so many of us, a scale can become a form of control. Like, I need to see where my body's at. And it can also be a derailing instrument in learning how to actually take care of your body. I mean, how many times have you stepped on a scale and saw the number and it just completely wrecked your mood for the entire day? Or you felt like, I can't eat today, or I can't eat what my body needs because of the number that I saw on the scale, and I'm super uncomfortable with it. Like, those are those subtle messages that we are perpetuating and recycling by, just going with the status quo of what we always grew up with. And I just want you to see here that you have another option. You don't have to keep doing what you saw modeled to you, especially if it's no longer aligning with the values that are at your core, like the things that you really want for yourself and for your children. And this can be so freeing. I remember the first time that I got rid of the scale, and I had a scale well up into my early 20s. And I remember feeling so freed after I let go of it. And it's scary too. I also want to acknowledge, if this is something that you've been doing regularly, it can be really terrifying to not have that in your life anymore. And also so freeing, I remember thinking about my future kids and the idea of them seeing me or coming into the bathroom and seeing me step on a scale just completely melted, my heart. I didn't want that to be something that my kids saw or that was even part of their future or part of their life. And, I just thought about what I wanted for my kids. And I want my kids to know that they don't have to weigh themselves in order to take care of their bodies. That, it does not have to be part of the equation. And, I know this can be tough, especially in certain seasons like pregnancy, where you may be having regular prenatal appointments and you're being weighed. And if you find yourself in that situation, I want you to be encouraged in knowing that you can ask for blind weights. You can even ask to not be weighed during your pregnancy. And I will be having more future episodes on this because I know this is a really tough area. But I just want you to think about the possibility of ditching the scale. And, even if that means taking it in your backyard and smashing it with a hammer and just letting it go completely, do it. I cannot stress how freeing this can be in terms of reparenting yourself around food in your body. So that is my tip number 2. Tip number 3 here is just learning to prioritize safety in your body. So many of us grew up, again, learning that we couldn't trust our bodies, that basically, we are at war with our body, right? Like a lot of dieting, like if we think about dieting, it's pitting us against our body and telling us, look, whatever your body is telling you isn't safe or it's not accurate, right? So you need to follow this set of external rules in order to keep your body safe or healthy. And those messages become so embedded into us where we literally feel distress in our own body. Like, I can't trust my body. I can't trust what it's telling me. And so we learn to live out of our body as a means of distress management, right? And I really believe that that's one of many functions of eating disorder behaviors is helping us, cope with the distress that we can feel in our body. And at the same time, it's also separating us from our bodies. And so, this idea of learning how to feel safe in your body again, relearning this connection, relearning what living in your body actually means. It can be so powerful for changing this dialogue and this narrative that your body isn't okay, that your body can't be safe, that your body can't be trusted. And I do also want to acknowledge that if you have experienced trauma, this is going to take more work and also more support and healing and maybe harder. And you may have learned to dissociate from your body as a means of survival because really, like trauma is stored in our body and that can cause us to feel very unsafe. And so I know this idea may feel easier said than done. And I just want you to start considering some ideas in terms of what may help me feel safer in my body, what can help me feel more connected to my body. Even just taking time to breathe and to listen to your breath and to feel your breath can be such a powerful mechanism for connecting to your body. So many of us learn to live in this dysregulated state of just go, 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 and never really tuning into what our body needs or listening to our bodies. And again, there can be a lot of layers to that there can be a protective function to that if you have learned that your body is in fact unsafe. But this is something that I just want you to consider. What might help you learn to reconnect to your body? Sometimes that can be, I've heard this explained in different ways, but grounding yourself and just observing through your senses, right? Like, what am I feeling on my body right now? What am I seeing? What am I smelling? What am I hearing? Tuning into your body and learning to live in your body again. And maybe we need to do a whole new episode on this. And I'm hoping to have some guests that can speak more into this idea of coming back home into your body, because this is so important in terms of learning how to reparent yourself around food in your body. So many of us are working towards healing our relationship with food. And for some of you, that might look like learning how to eat intuitively again. And that can feel really scary when you haven't learned to come back into your own body and to reconnect to your body. Because if you think about it, intuitive eating is essentially learning to listen to your body's cues, right? Your internal, interoceptive hunger and fullness cues. But if you're disconnected from your body because your body doesn't feel safe, that's going to feel really out of reach and something that might feel out of touch for you. And again, awareness is the first step towards healing. So think about this, what does it mean to feel safe in your body for you? Maybe that's something that you can journal about, that you can explore more and just learn to understand what would it take to feel safe in your body for you. So stay tuned for more on this, because I think this is something we definitely need to explore more on this podcast. Going into tip number 4 here is caring for your today body. This is a big one too. I think, again, kind of piggybacking on this concept of dissociating from our bodies and what our bodies need. So many of us also have this idea of, when X, Y, or Z happens, I will do this, right? Like, I remember for myself, for so long, I thought about that in terms of like my kids getting older, because those baby months and those baby stages just felt like sheer survival. And I remember telling myself, okay, when they turn a year old, I will start prioritizing my sleep or doing X, Y, or Z. And, it's hard because we really can put our needs to the back burner when we keep pushing it off until some arbitrary milestone, right? I know that this is also something that can be really intertwined with weight and body size, where it's like, okay, when I can fit into these clothes again, I will do X, Y, or Z. And, I just want to encourage you to really learn how to come to your body today and take care of the body that you have today. And this is a really big part of creating safety and connection into your body when you can say, I'm not going to put this off. I'm going to really tune into what this body needs for today. And, that can look like wearing clothes that fit your today body. That can look like making nourishment more of a priority, And again, I understand that these things are easier said than done. And you deserve to take care of your today body, not your tomorrow body, not your yesterday body, but your today body. And I just think about, again, I mentioned how diet culture really pits us against our body. It really causes us to be at war with our body. And I want you to think about aligning with your body. Like, what would it take to build, an allyship with your body, to build connection with your body again, to really saying, I'm going to befriend my body and learn how to take care of it. That is not the same thing as saying, I'm going to love my body, right? I think that message can feel really out of touch and arbitrary. Instead, I just want you to think about, what can I do to take care of my today body? Look, like, your body has brought you through so much and you deserve to take care of it. It is your home. It is the only home that you will have. And no matter what your journey has been, you can take the smallest steps to care for your body today. And, that's going to look different for all of us, depending on where you're at. But I know for a lot of us that looks like dressing the today body that you have, wearing things that you are comfortable in and that you feel good in, learning to eat things that actually taste good to you, that are not part of a prescribed eating plan, right? Like things that you actually enjoy. Learning how to, nourish your body and rest when you need to and not constantly be in this productivity mode. These are all ways that you can start to care for your today body. And piggybacking on that is our last tip here, our last practical application for reparenting yourself around food and your body. And that is prioritizing nourishment and satisfaction. So many of us grew up, again, believing this message or hearing this message or learning that we need to eat the least amount possible or eat the blandest, most boring foods because those were the least amount of calories, right? Or forcing yourself to eat vegetables because that's what you do in order to maintain this body size or to lose weight. And those messages are so damaging because it truly disconnects us from the true foundation of nourishment, which is actually finding satisfaction and pleasure in food. And really, when we can align ourselves to eat in a manner that actually brings us more pleasure and more satisfaction, that is actually more healthful for our body than eating in a rigid way or following a prescriptive way of eating, even if we don't like the food that we're eating. Like, I can't tell you, as part of my eating disorder, when I struggled with, restrictive eating, and I just remember like it was so black and white, the things that I ate. And I don't even remember tasting my food or enjoying it. It was just like, this is what I'm supposed to eat. And, now at the stage of eating where I'm at, it just makes me sad to look back and think about, how much was robbed from me in terms of joy and pleasure and satisfaction in eating because I was so prescriptive and restrictive and rigid around my food choices. And, so often we're taught to look at food in terms of, calories and points. And, so often we do that without even thinking. It's just so automatic. And in order to reparent ourselves around food and to kind of shift out of that narrative, this requires you to start looking at food in a different way. It's starting by understanding what does your body need? What do you even enjoy? And learning to be responsive and attuned to what those needs are. So, again, this can feel really challenging, especially if your brain just has this automatic narrative around food, or if you still find yourself in this prescriptive mode of eating. It's like, where do I even start? And I know for so many of the moms that I've worked with, it's like, I don't even know what I like, right? Like I've just learned to eat these foods, and I want you to start examining the things that you regularly eat and shop for and prepare for yourself, and ask yourself, do you actually like the food that you're eating? Do you finish a meal and actually feel satisfied? If not, that is a big clue that you're not eating for satisfaction. And there's a lot of things that you can start doing to shift out of this. So, again, this can be really challenging, but it is possible to rediscover the pleasure and satisfaction of food. So instead of looking at food with, the moral value that you may have grown up associating with it, I want you to consider the characteristics of food instead. So get curious about exploring your food through this lens of flavors and textures and, even temperature. Like, how does it feel in your body when you're eating it? Are the foods that you're eating sweet or crunchy or flavorful or spicy? What flavor profile do you actually enjoy eating? Do you walk away from that meal feeling content? Like, man, that was good. That really hit the spot. And this is not to say that every eating experience is going to be this like magical eating time that we're like, oh man, that was just like the best thing ever. I wish it could be. And practically speaking, it's just not always going to be like that. But generally speaking, we should be eating in a manner that is more satisfying for us. I remember in the early stages of my own healing journey from my eating disorder, after the refeeding period, it's just like rediscovering what I liked. And I remember I could not eat a vegetable for so long because that was such a big part of my eating disorder. Like, we're taught like fill up on vegetables because it's the lowest calorie. But ultimately I learned like, man, I don't really like vegetable or big like salad, and it's just not satisfying, or it doesn't taste good, And so it became this rediscovery journey of learning how to eat different things. And that also meant challenging my fears around a lot of foods that I was scared of eating for a long time. And, that can be challenging too. It's a layered process, but it starts by actually examining what are the things that bring me joy, that actually make me feel more satisfied. And I will tell you, this is my anecdotal evidence, from my own practice and from the moms and families that I've worked with. But the tendency, 9 out of 10 times, you are probably under eating and restraining yourself from eating enough. And it's this crazy phenomenon where I think so many of us are like walking around thinking that we're eating too much, when in reality, we're not eating enough, and we're not eating enough combinations of different foods to actually help our brains register that we're satisfied, that we're content. And so I want to encourage you, think about the meals that you regularly eat. What can you add to them to make it more flavorful or to make it more satisfying? And if this is something that just is bringing up a lot of distress for you, I just want to create space for you and hold space for you for where you're at. That's okay too. It's okay to just be aware of where I'm at and recognize, man, this feels way more challenging, and this might be an area that I need more support with. That's okay. That's okay too. I just want you to think about this concept of this message I may have internalized around food, where food is prescriptive and I only eat X, Y, and Z, and shifting into a different lens of how you view food, where it's like, you know what? I want to eat in a way that actually feels satisfying, where the food I'm eating tastes good, where I'm enjoying this. I know a lot of us grew up, this is just kind of a side note, but a lot of us grew up or were growing up in the 90s where it was this craze around low fat, fat-free everything. A lot of our parents and caregivers were inundated with those messages. And, now we're growing up where it's keto and low carb everything. And so it's just a mess out there. And I just want you to think about if you could put all those food rules and prescriptive food advice to the side, what could you eat that actually sounds good? One of my favorite questions to ask my clients is, if it was an ideal day and there was no fears, you could just kind of back burner all those fears and concerns that you might have around food in your body, what would you eat? If the sky was the limit, what would you eat for breakfast or lunch or dinner or snacks? Like, what would actually feel satisfying and good to you? And you may not know, and that's okay. I want to invite you into this maybe discovery phase where you do some trial and error around, food again, like allowing yourself to eat things and rediscover what actually feels satisfying and pleasurable to you. And I cannot tell you how powerful this perspective around food is in terms of modeling to your children. We want our children to be at home in their bodies, to trust their bodies, and to eat for satisfaction as well. And our kids are like the OG intuitive eaters in terms of eating based on what feels good to them in the moment. It's so incredible. I love watching that in my own children, and hopefully you've been able to observe that too. And what we actually see from research is that when we're able to eat in alignment with what our body needs, and when we eat for satisfaction, that is actually what's healthier for our bodies over the long run. So often we try to hyper focus on the quality of the food or what we're actually eating, but the rigidity around that is potentially more harmful to your body, right? So it's really broadening your perspective of health and what food is, and, hyper focusing on the quality of the food or what you eat isn't going to erase any childhood trauma around food or any behaviors around food that are affecting how you eat. It's looking at the bigger picture here and understanding the importance of how you engage with food and the role of that, not only in your relationship with food, but in your overall health as well. So I know I spent a lot more time on that last point. I just want you to understand the importance of that. And especially when it comes to reparenting yourself, because that is a direct opposite of all the things that we learned about food in our body. And this is an opportunity for you to unlearn that through practice by giving yourself permission to find pleasure and enjoyment in food. And that is an act of caring for your body. And in modeling that, you are helping your children internalize a new belief around food in your body. And that is one that communicates trust, one that prioritizes caring for your body. You are modeling those behaviors, mama, even if it's one brave step at a time. And I know I gave you a few different steps here, and I don't want you to feel overwhelmed and feeling like, oh my gosh, I got to do all these things at once. I want to encourage you to think about one thing that I may have said on the podcast that resonated with you. And I want to encourage you and challenge you to practice that one thing. You do not have to have this laundry list of doing all these things. I want you to try to do one thing this week and know that that one step is a brave and powerful step. No matter how small it is, you got to start somewhere. And taking that step is going to help you shift out of those generational cycles. Okay? So I hope this gave you some encouragement. I would love to hear what your one thing is that you're going to be doing. So feel free to connect with me on Instagram at Crystal Cargis, or you can send me an email. I'm at hello@crystalcargis.com. I would love, love, love to hear from you and what your takeaways from today's episode were. Be sure to tune in next week. We're going to continue this conversation. And thank you so much again just for being here. It says so much, again, that you're here, that you're listening, that you're eager to learn. And I see you and I acknowledge your courage, and I'm just excited for you, mama. So thanks for showing up, and can't wait to reconnect with you next week. Thank you for listening to this week's episode of the Lift the Shame podcast. For more tips and guidance on your motherhood journey, come connect with me on Instagram at Crystal Cargis. Until next week, mama, I'll be cheering you on. Bye for now.